what we're going to do here is really just talk about trends and other things that have been happening, right? And also just the learnings and things that you guys have had, as well as some of the things that we talked about this morning. Just slight insights into a few pieces. I'm going to ask you some questions around that. But just to give it an introduction, so of course you guys probably know them. With Google and Microsoft, these guys have been in the industry for quite a while. And I went and did a exercise myself, leveraging this community. And I talked to let's see, I think it was between 12 and 16 of my peers who have done this before, who have basically gone hyperscale. And we had a really good conversation, and I thought there were some very interesting insights that came out of those discussions themselves. And I thought it'd be great to simulate a bit of those with you guys.
I was going to say, where are the other 10 to 14?
They were scared of you guys. That's why they, yeah. But again, both of you guys have lived this. You've started this movie. You've gone through the pains, right? And we were going to have Tom on as well, but he had a family thing came up this afternoon, so he had to leave. But Tom from Facebook. But there's some interesting parallels between the three of you, as well as things that I've seen in my career, as well as the majority of others. So first thing, I want to talk about scale. Both of you have represented something about scale and something you learned. And there is this thing about what size do you think about? And if you were now going to do this again, what would it be? So Christian.
What size?
So I was planning for 10x. You said,
okay.
You're nuts, Steen. What did you tell me to do? And Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever size you plan to scale to, it's too small. I'm trying to think in the 5 years or 6 years. Well, the 5 years that I actually led the whole global operations and the whole team, I'm starting to scale back some. But when I led the team, if I just look at the capital spend in those 4 to 5 years, it was 10x. Had I known that, I would have never taken the job. Because already the job seemed pretty big, at the very onset. So I think it's always about at minimum thinking 10x and actually thinking beyond that, because whatever we're doing now, we're setting the foundation for how things are going to be. And then when you're operating at this scale, it's really hard to then change the legacy kind of infrastructure. We just heard the Open 19 thing, 19-inch racks. Why are they 19-inch racks? Well, frankly, it's because that's what they've always been. Right. That's exactly right. It goes way back. That's 25, 30, 40 years, right? And that's one of the scary things about what we're doing. And so I think this whole scaling thing, we have to really be thoughtful about the whole thing. What do you do when you're thinking 100x? What are you thinking when you're thinking 1000x? Where do things break? Hyperscale is like quantum physics, right? It's nonlinear. And so there's so many things that break that we have to anticipate today. So the bottom line is, I don't know how big, right? We built our first data center that we owned in 2007, and that was 27 megawatts. And we were like, did we build too big? Will we ever fill this? And now that's, anything smaller than that. I mean, our leases are bigger than that, right? So I don't think there is a top number. Joe?
Well, I think that, directionally you're absolutely right, but I think that you just can't predict. So whatever you think today is going to be wrong one way or the other. So don't lock yourself into, one big architecture, because it might change. You may be, growing 10, 20x, but it may not be in monolithic big campuses. It might be more globally distributed. You might still have monolithic big campuses and globally distributed. So you just will not be able to estimate. But in terms of, sheer scale, I can announce this because Sundar just did this morning, but we just released for public consumption our TPU 2.0, which is a tensor processing unit. It's our own GPU designed specifically for artificial intelligence. Each chip, 180 teraflops. Each pod, 11.5 petaflops. 11,500 petaflops. Winston, you know from Intel days. Yeah, the amount of compute power is just beyond what any of us could have ever imagined, even just a couple years ago. And there's probably half a dozen startups that are looking at this exact same thing, AI specific chipsets. And so who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of years. So once again, my crystal ball is really, really cloudy.
This was an interesting conversation for me because I've always been kind of all right, I need a 10-year view. I'm going to have a 10x growth type thing. I got a plan for these pieces. But both of you went back and said, yeah, but it may be bigger than that. And if you do it, would you think differently? And that was one I remember specifically, is if you had a campus, not saying that everything should be big campuses, but if you're going in to say, I'm doing 10x, what if it's 20? Do you have optionality? Have you done things that actually allow you to do that scale that you could say, I don't have to, but I could? And most of the times you did, right? You kept growing into all these things. But then it goes into that other element. What if you don't plan appropriately? And so, Joe, you were talking about I think it was 2007 or 6 or something, how your business was structured. And then today. So tell me a little bit more about that transition or yeah, go ahead.
I don't think it's any big secret, but back in when we were first doing our first data centers ourselves, we were sole sourced to one company doing all of our internal design and construction management. And they were acting as kind of like our engineering firm, our GC firm, our construction administration firm, commissioning, everything, right?
Are they in the room?
What's that?
Are they in the room?
No, I don't think there's any reps in the room. And that, that got us what we needed at the time, because basically we could go one-stop shop. Mm-hmm. And almost overnight, we acquired a data center engineering team. It wasn't our own because we were still building our team, but we acquired commissioning experience. We acquired construction administration experience, construction management, project management. So it was like the proverbial, the acqui-hire, where we didn't acquire the company, we just contracted all of their resources. That worked great when we were pretty much building in the US and we had started in Europe. But at some point, you need to scale beyond that. And then, now when you're talking about like 11 projects on 4 continents in 8 countries, that just doesn't scale with a single company because they're not licensed in every part of the world. So we had to go out and distribute our resources. And over the time, we built our own team. So now that we lead all those efforts ourselves, we distribute those resources globally and we contract locally so that you can get the expertise, you can get the licenses locally and do it all, much more parallelized. Yeah. It's just, we didn't imagine when we first started building our own data centers. It was pretty much the same way. Our very first data center in the Dalles, Oregon, was very similar in size to what you're talking about, and we built 2 of them at the same time. And someone had the foresight to have 3 pads, and they built on pad 1 and 3. They did that because it was easy to have a laydown yard that could serve both pads at the same time. It's nice that they were thinking ahead, except for when you need to build pad 2, now you have no laydown yard. But we've learned, and so you go from that one campus with a couple buildings on it to our Iowa campus is 1,100 acres.
And you might be building a new one in Nevada.
Yeah.
Yep, might be even bigger. So,
yep.
Yeah.
So, for us, it was kind of a similar path. I mean, I hate sitting on any panel with Joe because we kind of just go, yeah, same, yeah. You know, there's no real good debate, right?
Learn that too.
But one of the things we've also done for various reasons is, like Joe's saying, it's always about how do we augment our scale, because we can't augment internally fast enough. And one of the things we've actually also done is really use the whole leasing ecosystem as well. When you look at the whole ecosystem, and a lot of our builds are actually leases, right? So we use the lease providers just almost as another part of our team. It's an augmentation. And that really has helped us scale rapidly. So you really have to use the whole ecosystem. And this is even why, you know, some of the discussions we had earlier, I actually want, and as an example, you even see now fiber. There's partnerships across companies to lay fiber across the various seas and so on. But for me, my interest in this community is we need to be doing things together, which will drive even further augmentation for us to scale and in a much more efficient way. And that's, I think, a big piece of it. It's like everything is an important piece to the cog. We can no longer just say, I'm going to do it all on my own. It's really about the community to help the scaling. And especially once you get onto the whole sustainability topic, that's even a bigger thing. So there's just so many angles of this thing to really figure out how we scale. And then I look at, you know, like Uber's, they're going to have to scale even more rapidly than Joe and I ever had to experience. And if I look at scaling and doing that on your own at 10x the rate we did it at, I just don't see how it can be done, right? And so this is, you know, with Dean has some really good insight into this, that he really needs to leverage the whole ecosystem, and that's really all of us. So, and that's the only way he'll be able to do it that rapidly. Thankfully, we'll be a part of that success then, right? So, anyway.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, and why I did this is that, you know, I didn't want to have the ego thinking I know how to do everything, right? And I wanted to go back and have the collective understanding to be able to say, okay, I'm gaining insights from all these different pieces, and you know what, the strategy would change a bit this way. But we are in a kind of a new space, and we had a conversation about these core data centers and edge. And both of you guys had a little different opinion of this, which was interesting. You know, we've got.
I hope I remember what my opinion was.
Yes, yeah. So we've talked about this morning. We talked about it last night, and I think Jack Pouchet, wherever he's at, right? The things that are going on at the edge. So the Internet of Things and what's happening in the distributed computing and those pieces. I'm living it. I know a lot of us are actually having to deal with this, whether it's a service provider, a cloud provider, or you know, an individual company, just like you've always talking about with trying to distribute for LinkedIn. You know, there are things that are changing. And the climate, right, the landscape of this industry. And this is one of the things I wanted to ask with you, Joe, is the application profiles in the past, right, compared to today, where your business was and where your business is, has actually fundamentally changed, I believe, the way your portfolio's got to be put together. So can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so going back to the beginnings of Google, when you're building data centers to house the compute infrastructure for your own products, Gmail, search, you know, after the acquisition of YouTube, that changed the demand profile quite a lot. But we were able to stay relatively ahead of the demand plan, because you know, you can look back and say, okay, historically search has grown at this ratio, so if we build at that ratio plus a little extra buffer, we're going to be safe.
The good old days.
Right? Yeah, the good old days. And then, you know, you start layering on new things, and now we're not just building for our own products, right? With our public cloud, and Christian's gone through the exact same experience, you're building for everyone else's products. And everyone else's products, I have no idea about. And frankly, they often don't have any idea about. I think it's pretty well public knowledge that Pokemon Go, Niantic, is hosted on our service. And when they gave us their growth projections, they gave us their day one queries per second, and they were only off by a factor of 40x. Now, if you're building out your own data center to do that, and just as a buffer, you decide to tell your CFO, I'm going to build 40x more than I think we need, just because maybe, they're probably not going to like that answer very much. On the other hand, if you build what you think you need and you're 40x short, you've just crippled the business and they couldn't grow. So this is what everyone is realizing. And where else can you go and have that type of flexibility? And as good as they thought their crystal ball was about what the uptake of this new game is going to be, they were, wildly off.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, though, why scale is so important for the cloud to really work effectively. Because if it were some smaller organization with not a large footprint, 40x would have completely blown it out of the way. It would,
Absolutely, yep.
right? But your business was able to absorb it,
Yep.
right? Just because of the scale, right? And I think that's really the we were talking about that there's a barrier to entry into this business because of the scale, but it's the scale that actually makes it work to give the promise of infinite capacity to the customers, because that's what you gave them. The 40x overnight change in demand is essentially saying you've got infinite capacity.
That's right. Yeah. And there's the like you said, the only way that this is possible is at that scale when you could take advantage of these kind of shared resources across all the customers. I mean, every customer has their own workload profile. Traditional enterprise, they would size their compute maybe for, I don't know, end of month, end of quarter financial close, when those systems were banging those big monolithic, I don't know, HP Superdomes or something like that, right? And so they would have these in their data center sized at that, that 8-hour per month need. Well, then the rest of the time, it's way underutilized. So, I mean, this is the promise of the public cloud, is to be able to spread all those workloads and the diurnal effects and all that. And now, instead of having a data center or your compute infrastructure that's utilized at single digit percentage, now you're driving that up into high double digit percentages.
Yeah, and I think the promise of the cloud and the options and those things is it's an easy value proposition, and you just gave a great example of it. I think maybe this will be a little controversial, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. There's kind of this, how do I say it? Hyperscale customers. So think about you as hyperscale providers, right? You went through this entire journey. Then you start to think about LinkedIn, right? You think about eBay. You think about a number of companies. We've got a lot of internal infrastructure, and we're growing like this. And so the model for cloud is many, many, many people on it, right? Many people consuming it, and then the collective of all those is optimizing and gaining the benefits and the gains from it. But when you start to have these large consumers, so I would believe the capacity plan you had, where Pokemon Go basically took it, right? Put strains on other things, maybe. But that consumption, at some point, they're drawing things that are similar to what you guys are doing. Is that and what I'm saying here, and this is why I think it might be a little controversial. So why would a large hyperscale customer actually be on an enterprise cloud versus going and doing the same things like we're talking about with Open19? Just an opinion. Is that?
I think I go back to, I love what Joe said at DCD. We're doing this out of necessity, right? I think if our companies could just put their workload somewhere and have the capacity when they need it. Yep. I mean, we're essentially a consolidator of workload on the planet. Mm-hmm. I mean, that might be the best way to look at it.
Yep.
And we happen to have among the largest infrastructure on the globe.
Yeah.
So once again, it's not just the economies of that scale, but let's say that I build and I want to have 10% buffer. Mm-hmm. For me, 10% buffer on thousands of megawatts is a lot of buffer. Yeah. any enterprise, even a hyperscale enterprise individually, if they have 100 megawatts, maybe they want 10 megawatts of buffer. And if you use that up quicker or at twice the rate than you thought, and you know what the timelines for construction are. So, you have to go back to trying to match the availability of new capacity to your demand profile. And most companies, in my experience, their ability to do demand planning is pretty limited. Even the best companies, it's not great.
Non-existent.
Yeah. And so, they're always wrong. So the only thing you can do is try and match your supply timeline to your demand visibility. And if your demand visibility is a quarter, you're not going to build a new data center in a quarter. The only thing you can do is have a provider that has that, so you can flex up and down as needed.
And so, so John Cowan is sitting in the audience right now. Yeah.
I just want to say, and that's really the benefit. I think Joe nailed it on that.
Yep.
Rarely do you, but you
I know,
did on
right.
that one. You did on
Get
that
lucky
one.
once in a while.
But it is that buffer. That buffer was able to take that 40x that he had
Pokemon.
a customer, that Pokemon. And but if they would have planned to have a buffer to make sure they don't cap their business, the costs would have been enormous.
Oh yeah.
So
business killer, I think, at that point.
It is. And
Lost opportunity, all those things.
Right.
So John from Six Fusion, we had a conversation once about the parallel in this industry, where the reason that the clouds and the scale is there is very much like the utilities. Everybody was building their own generation of power, and then it became an economy element of, we need to standardize this, and it starts to grow, and then you've got a consolidation, and you have larger players like we got right now, the 5 to 7 cloud providers that are really like the large utilities.
The whole going back, even just like 10 or certainly 20 years ago, it is completely implausible to think about anyone coming up with a new business model that could overnight grow to have 100 million customers. Today, app developers that create the latest, greatest thing, the next Snapchat or whatever, right? They go basically from 0 to 100 million users almost overnight. And, there's, right. And there's just, the business that the global internet has the global connectivity, the business models that it has enabled have just fundamentally changed the needs for building out infrastructure.
Yeah, and I'm asking this question because it's always a debate that I have with people, and so there's absolutely no denying there's a value proposition within public cloud, and what you guys have built is very, very difficult to repeat, and I think that's hence why there's such growth in the market itself. But let's go back to the underlying infrastructure again, kind of what we do, our bread and butter. We had a conversation about modularity. Okay, and you had mentioned that there's, you do these great big campuses and things, and you suddenly got sunk costs if you don't fill it fast enough, all those things. So tell me about modularity today. We hear this buzzword all over the place, but give me some real tangibles.
All right, so let me give you kind of two different business use cases. If you have a demand of, say, 100 megawatts, and you know that the demand is going to be taken up quickly. So it's a large day one and fast growing so that you're going to reach your 100 megawatt day N relatively quickly. The most cost-effective way of building modules for that are in very large chunk sizes. You might do, say, 20 megawatt cooling skids and have, 6 or 7 of them, so you've got some N plus redundancy. You wouldn't probably put in 121 megawatt cooling skids, right? So now, on the other end of that spectrum, suppose that you have a small day one need, and it's a relatively fast-growing business, or maybe it's even a very fast-growing business, but you don't know what the day N, how long you're going to take to get to that 100 megawatt day N. So if you build in those very large modules, it's quite plausible you might have only 1 or 2 megawatts for a while on a 20 megawatt cooling skid. That's not efficient, and it's not a good deployment of your capital either. So you have to have solutions that cover both ends of that spectrum. At least that's the way I think about it. I have some business uses that are big day one and growing rapidly to the day end capacity. So we have designs for that. We have other, like if you're going into a new cloud region, it might just be a small number of single digit megawatts day one. And then, even if it's growing at, multiples year over year, you're still going to be a few years before you get to like 10 or 12 megawatts. When does it get to 100? I don't know how long it would take, right? So I certainly wouldn't go and build a 100 megawatt shell with 100 megawatts of mechanical and cooling infrastructure for the first few megawatts day one. So, and that's where, certainly the leasing ecosystem really makes a lot of sense. The ability to go in, lease, assess the uptake, and assess your business in that new market, and then still have time to react and build ahead if you need to build something much larger.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, I mean, again, I'll agree with everything Joe said.
I'll ask you first next time.
Our businesses are so different.
Yeah, but it's all relative, right? As we get bigger and bigger, our definition of modularity changes too. Our modules get bigger and bigger, right? And it's really these new regions that Joe was talking about that where we might still start small, but once you're already in a mature part of the curve on the demand, you fill this stuff so fast. And if you continue scaling, if we're talking about 10x in the past 4 or 5 years, and we're expecting 10x, and then your module scales will also scale 10x. And so, so I don't know what modularity really means anymore. I mean, we experimented with containers. A whole bunch of us experimented with containers, and we're still deploying some containers. But at the end of the day, when I look at what our build sizes are and what our lease providers are giving us, I would have never imagined that, 5 years ago, that leases would be at the size they are today.
And back in the day, you couldn't. Like when we started to build our own, say 2006 timeframe, it was next to impossible to go out and find 10 megawatts of lease that was at anything that you could afford if it was available and that was high enough quality. So, once again, we started building our own out of necessity.
So let me go into a little different topic, and I am going to open this up for questions for the room as well. But edge specifically. Now, this is where in the conversation. So the way that your cloud is deployed, and then you just talked about the AI aspects of it, and these very large GPU things, and then we talk about smart cities and the potential of distributed computing. So from your perspective, you've been deploying these large portfolios of things in certain number of regions, certain number of availability zones, et cetera. What does it look like now with the Internet of Things? Is there something that changes?
So there's a difference between that and edge.
Okay.
Right. When we're talking regions, that's not an edge. Right. That the edge is the caching stuff. Right. We, because of data residency, we do have to land in some situations. We have to land local data centers, and that's to meet those regulatory requirements. Right. Edge is just another way to get things closer. Right. So I don't want to mix those two things.
So, and I would disagree with you, but let's have that debate in a second.
At the end of the day, an edge can become something bigger too. Yeah, but it's really more of a network architecture thing, I think, at the end of the day. But it's all growing. So whatever it is, you could call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's just always marching. And as you're scaling it up, we've had edges become data centers. We have edges in big campuses, right? I mean, so it's not as clear cut.
Yeah. We have, I think almost every single telco in the world, we have some racks with them because they're peering racks. They're copies of of our search cache. So they're copies of that. That's not necessarily, that's not for our own consumption. That's just, peering capability. And that's many, many, many times greater than the number of our own true edge cache sites where we're maybe caching YouTube and things like that. So those are two different use cases. And so, I don't know what edge means. People talk to me about, are you afraid of the Internet of Things? What's that going to do for your data center demand? And I'm like, to be honest with you, there's already 2 billion Android devices connected every day, and they're way more chatty than your refrigerator is going to be. So I'm not too really worried about it,
Depends on what's in your fridge. Yeah, no, that's it. Well,
Yeah, right, exactly.
so let me
replenish.
So I'm going to give a little counter to this, okay? And this is what you love to do. So, the things themselves are changing, and the data volumes of those things are increasing. And so when you talk about the cars themselves, or you just talk about the smart cities in general, and the way those are going to be connected, and the rapid pace in which those things are happening, I think when I talk about edge, it is that I need some type of ingest or computation or decision-making things, not a POP, right? Not a data center, but I need an edge location that's going to be, say, it's anywhere from a rack to 10 racks. There's something there that has to be managed. And you said it. It gets closer and closer to where that actual data is generated and the need is. I think that the definitions are going to change because of those specifics. And, in my own business, we've got cars, you've got cars, there's trucks, there's lots of things that are generating orders of magnitude more data than any of those other refrigerators and the other Internet of Things. Yet, all of those things are multiplying in orders of magnitude as well. So the sheer volume of those plus the data is going to drive, I think, a change that comes at the edge itself. And the edge is, for us, in cities, where things are actually happening, right? That's different than the workloads from before. So that's why I'm asking that question is, you must be seeing similar challenges and coming from customers and things saying, hey, I really, it's not just caching. I really need to get something closer over here. Does that change anything in your portfolio? And if it did come that way, how would you deal with it?
I think what we're getting requests more and more for are customers that say, look, I've got this special box. It does something very proprietary for me. And I can't put that onto a VM in Google's public cloud or something. But by the same token, that needs to be in like kind of microsecond latency from the rest of my services that I do want to actually put on Google's cloud or something. So how can you get me a place where I can co-locate my proprietary box that is microsecond latency away from your public cloud? Yep. That's a request, a kind of a use case that's becoming more common. So I don't know what that proprietary stuff that they do on that box is. I don't know if it really needs to be a microsecond, latency away, but this is what they're telling us. Yeah. So on the other hand, you have a different case with, autonomous vehicles, since that's something that both of our companies have some interest in.
Careful.
I know. But they are gathering a tremendous amount of data. Yes. That data is locally stored in that vehicle because you're not using, Wi-Fi to transmit that. You're locally storing it, but at some point you need to upload it. You need to ingest that so that you can, use all your AI to figure out better ways to make those vehicles work. So what do? Do you have the cars go back to your main campus where they plug in to your backbone and your network, and then all of that gets, backhauled to your data centers? Maybe. I don't know. Or are you going to have, little data centers in every city that those cars and vehicles are working in? There's a lot of cities in just this country alone. So, I don't know.
But that's to me but that's the thing is this is the emerging stuff. This is autonomy is just one example of it, right? And now you think about virtual reality and the processing elements of that and the massive video capabilities that are going to be needed for it. I think there's this little wave coming to me that I see that is different than the way we've done some of these things before, and it'll be interesting to see how things shape up within the cloud providers and with all of us. So let me shift over. We've got really two other things, and then I want to go open to questions. The first one is that we've had a conversation about people and talent, right? We said at the beginning, we talked about it last night, we talked about it this morning, and the lack for that. And Christian, you said specifically that the problem in this industry is us. Tell me more why that is.
Yeah. So my biggest fear is becoming all those people that I always fought in my own career, thinking I know it all. And so I'm always looking for people who I feel are learners. I'm almost less concerned about what their pedigree is. I mean, that's certainly important, right? It's certainly important. But what I'm really seeing is the people who are learners are the ones that will pick up what we're doing quick, but they're also people who will bring new things to the table. When I worked at HP years ago, there's a guy I worked with, a fellow. He was a HP fellow. He was not a learner. I won't mention his name, but he knew everything. And I think there were so many missed opportunities, and I think we went in the wrong direction at that company with the Itanium. Can I say that? Yeah. But anyway, I really think we have to be careful that we don't think we know it all. I mean, this room is full of a bunch of leaders in the industry. I think we have to, my general feeling, I'm at the later part of my career, and it's one of the reasons I feel pretty strongly about starting to step aside, because I've added my value into this industry. And it's really important for us to start bringing the next generation and bring people from different worlds. If you really look at this industry itself, most of us in this room were not even in data centers at the beginning of our careers. We went into it all from different directions. I was actually in defense, right? You were in applied materials, and you start walking around and talking to different people. And that's what made this industry so successful, is because it was all this immigration. And I think it's really important for it to thrive. We have to continue doing it rather than keep generating over and over, right? And so it's really that diversity of thought. So I look for hole fillers, learners, and people who like ambiguity.
It really is true. I mean, we talked about it just a couple of years ago. What we thought was the right answer isn't the right answer necessarily today. And it is really easy to kind of get caught up and start believing your own BS too much. So you have to have people that are smart and come from a variety of backgrounds that can call you on it and say, wait a minute, I think there's a better way to do that. Or, we used to do something similar in this completely different industry that I came from, but we did it this way. I'm also a big proponent of taking lessons learned from other, industries that maybe are much more mature, and bringing them and adapting them to what we need. So I think I completely agree with you, Christian. Look for the people that have the ability to learn, that are not set in their ways, don't think they know it all, and are smart enough to realize when they've made a mistake, we need to do something different.
So one last question and insight from you guys. We talked a lot this morning about the potential power of this community, and because we're leaving our companies at the door, right? Because it is the collective of all these people in the room and their experience, good and bad, right? And how do you think that as a community we could impact larger change in this industry through Infrastructure Masons? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. For me, the biggest opportunity I think that we have is really to foster the generation that are going to be following us, and maybe the generation after them, putting in place with partnerships with universities, the ecosystem that enables them to get the general education that they need to be smart, to be resourceful, to be clever, and then come to the industry and think of new ways and better ways of trying to solve for the same fundamental problems. Right? We're at the end of the day, we're still solving fundamental physics. It's electrons in, it's heat out, it's bits across fiber. So we're still solving for fundamental physics, but there's always better ways of doing that, and that's what we need. And a lot of the, I think there's an awareness issue. I think a lot of young people that are going into school today, they don't know necessarily what they want to do in the future. Same as, most of us were the same way. When you went into university, you probably had maybe an idea of what you wanted to study. Is that exactly what you came out with? And are you doing exactly that today that you thought you were going to be doing? So probably not for the majority of people. So how do we give them the exposure, the awareness of what types of challenges, what types of problems, and what type of an environment are we working in? I think that most people still have no idea. I still hear it when we hire people. They're like, I had no idea that a person like me could get a job at Google. I thought that they only hired computer science engineers. And so it's that awareness, it's the building the ecosystem to where they can go through a program and come out prepared to step into the challenges that are going to be, in the next 5 or 7, 10 years. I don't know what those are going to be, but I'm sure they're going to be different than what we're doing today.
What was the original question?
How do we harness the power of this community to make change in the industry? You were testing me right there, weren't you? Okay.
I was listening to Joe and I just kind of forgot what the question was.
It happens a lot.
He was mesmerized by Joe.
He was very thoughtful and I was just kind of living the moment. So, I talked about this earlier today. I do think we're kind of at a crossroads in our industry with respect to Joe's going to keep building data centers. We're going to keep building data centers, keep building capacity. Everyone in this room is going to keep doing their thing. But at the end of the day, I think what I love about this industry, it is a great bunch of guys. I mean, you can tell.
And
we all
gals.
get along.
Yes.
Right? What's that?
And gals.
So I'm from New York. Guys is the same thing. Guys and gals, right? Right. For those of you from New York, you know that. Really look at what it is we do. What is it we compete with? I tend to think there's very little new happening in actual data center infrastructure. We compete on services. And so if we elevate ourselves to saying that, how would we run our businesses differently? How would we collaborate? You already see a lot of collaboration on big projects. We talked about this earlier too, which was the network projects across the seas and all of that. I really think there's even bigger things we can do collectively that can really transform how effectively and efficiently we're doing what we're doing. And that's my belief, and that's my hope. And that's why I'm going to, continue to chug along in this business, because I think that's the exciting thing, is how do we really change what competition means? So.
All right, we're going to wrap up. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.